Yeah, we're live. It is 1:56 on Friday afternoon. Want to try to get something in, just in case we weren't able to hang out tonight. It's Friday night, it's date night, right? So I got to get stuff going on. But I want to talk about some dyno testing that I found. Actually, I found the photos for it. I have had the dyno test, and happens a lot where I can't put the two things together. Like I have one of the things. Okay, I've got all the photos that I need. A lot of times for earlier stuff, I don't have dyno results. Sometimes I don't have video. Sometimes I don't have photos. One or more of the things is missing, and I can put them together. But I finally found this, and so I'm going to do a complete video on this and talk about all of the dyno testing that we did. This one was on an LS2 crate motor that we had for a really long time. I did a lot of testing on it early on because this one came from the guys from GM Performance Parts, and then actually from Gandard Chevrolet are the guys that supplied it. And so we did a lot of testing on it, and then it sat for a long time, for a number of years, and then we used it later on for more stuff. And not too long ago, probably 2019 or 20 or something like that, we did some testing with it. And I actually put a Brian Tooley camshaft in it, and we did cylinder heads, did airflow research cylinder heads. We did an intake manifold on it. And so we did some modifications to it. So I wanted to bring this to you. So this will kind of be the shortened version for the live feed guys. And then I'm going to do the full video up probably tomorrow. I should be able to get all of that in. But we want to talk about it a little bit here tonight, because one of the things that happened was we ran the test basically in the wrong order. And I've done this in the past on things 5-liter Fords and small block Chevys and stuff, where the gains that you get from something, and that's kind of what I wanted to talk about tonight. I wanted to illustrate that the gains you get from things depend on what order you do the testing in. So on an LS, if it's not obvious to everybody by now, the thing that you should change first off, and this goes for any of the LSs, any of the LS families, the first thing that you should put in, really, obviously boost is always good, but you should do a camshaft. So you should do cam and spring upgrade as your first thing. And the reason for this is, and this is more so on some LSs than others, but the reason that you do this is because the LS has almost everything else it needs. We'll go ahead and run through this so you get some excitement going on here in the video. But the reason that you do that is because the LS has the other things. It has a good intake manifold in most cases. It has good cylinder heads, or at least decent cylinder heads. It has enough compression, and it has enough displacement, usually. And so when you do upgrades on it, if you put a camshaft in it, you usually get big gains. It's not unusual to get 30, 40, 50, 60 horsepower, whatever, from a camshaft. And you can usually get really solid power gains because it has those other things. And there are a lot of other engine families, small block Chevys, particularly small block Fords, small block Dodges, where if you just do one upgrade, even a camshaft, the gains are not as great on that combination because it doesn't have the other things. It doesn't have really good cylinder heads. We know, for instance, using as an example the 5-liter Ford, those heads are terrible. they flow 150 or 160 CFM. A set of LS heads, even a cathedral port heads, might flow 100 CFM more than that. And then the rec port ones, even another 50 or 60 on top of that. So you have a lot better cylinder heads on the LS. You have a better intake manifold. Just everything is better about the LS compared to that, using that example as a small block Ford. Everything is better. So you just put the camshaft in, and on a small block Ford, lots of other things are holding it back. You do get good gains changing from a stock cam to a decent sized camshaft, but not like you do on an LS, because the other things are holding it back. By contrast, like in this one that we're going to talk about, we changed the cylinder heads first. We went from a stock set of heads, in this case, already decent, arguably the highest flowing cathedral port heads anyway, in a 243 head on this LS2. We went from those to airflow research heads, but we didn't get a huge gain. I mean, we did get some gain because the airflow research are definitely better than those, but we didn't have enough motor under it to support what those heads could, or to flow what those heads could support. I mean, the airflow research heads flowed 300 CFM. The 243 heads probably flow 245 or 250 CFM. So we got a big jump in potential airflow and potential power or production, but we just didn't have the motor to go with it at the time. So we should have done the cam first, but we did the cam last. So we'll talk about this a little bit. So what we had was an LS2, and then we did airflow research heads first. Then we did an intake manifold on it. We swapped out the LS2 intake manifold for a fast intake manifold. And then we put a BTR red hot camshaft in it. And naturally, we got good gains from the combination of all of those things. But the gains that we got from each one of them would have been different. And so we'll talk about this. And here are the power gains that we got. So we started off with an LS2. Like I said, this thing we'd done a lot of testing on it. We'd run all kinds of things on this motor. And then later on, we did even more testing with it. But when we ran this thing, when it was stock, the LS2 made 460 horsepower, 461, and 448 foot-pounds of torque. We ran this thing back with I think we ran this even with an XFI. We weren't even using a Holley HP on this one. And then when we put the airflow research heads on, it went from 460 horsepower to 485 horsepower. So it picked up about 25 horsepower from the head change, and you can kind of see it there. I have them all labeled. 485 horsepower and 465 foot-pounds of torque. So it did good. But again, only because the stock heads that we had on it would already support the power level, and it had a stock camshaft in it, and it had a stock intake manifold, all of which were restrictive, particularly the camshaft and the intake manifold. So then when we changed the intake manifold from the LS2 intake manifold with a manual 92 millimeter throttle body, we actually put in a fast 92, not the 102, which we normally do. It's because the 102 is already being used on another motor. And so all I had access to when we did this testing was the 92. So we put the fast 92, the Wilson deal, with a 92 millimeter throttle body on it, and we picked up more power. Run with the fast manifold, the power jumped from 485 horsepower and 465 foot-pounds up to 501 horsepower. So we picked up, like 16 horsepower. And 485 foot-pounds. So we actually picked up like 23 foot-pounds of torque. So the fast manifold was a lot better than the LS2 manifold. Even the 92 version, which is enough for this power level without any problem. Then we did what everybody would expect. We put the BTR camshaft in it, which this one was a red hot camshaft, 221, 240 something, 619 lift at 113 degree LSA. And then that pushed power up to 565 horsepower. And torque was up a bit, like 10 foot-pounds to 498 foot-pounds. You could see most of the gain was out at the top compared to the factory LS2 camshaft, but it did pick up power from about 32 or 300 on up. Not surprising. The LS2 camshaft does fairly well, but it doesn't make the low-speed power that like the truck camshafts do. So it's already down in power. If you compare the truck camshaft to an LS2 camshaft, it's down low. But that's why we were able to have kind of comparable power there. But we see a big change in power from the cam upgrade, which is normal on all the LS stuff. And my point is that we wouldn't have seen as big a change with the camshaft if we would have done the camshaft first and it still had the stock heads on it and the stock intake manifold on it. Then we would saw gains from the intake manifold. Then we would have seen gains from the airflow research heads. And if we would have put the intake on and then the heads would have shown more power. We know because if you just look at the flow rates of the heads and then also correlate that with lots of other testing that I've done on those particular heads and heads like that, you see that on the right application, it's not unusual for us to pick up 50 or 60 horsepower from those heads. And just looking at the airflow numbers, 300 CFM versus 250 CFM, the easy rule of thumb is we just double the peak flow number. And then we kind of can tell what those heads can support. Now they can support a little more than that, but one of those heads, the airflow research heads, are 600 horsepower heads, and the stock heads are like 500 horsepower heads. And so you could see, relatively speaking, good ported 243 heads, or like these airflow research heads or trick flow heads or other cathedral port heads are like this. The trick flow 225s are a good example. Things that flow more than 300 CFM, easily able to support way more power if you have enough motor really underneath it to utilize that airflow. And so in our tests, just like when we have tested either ported LS3 heads or aftermarket LS3 heads, when we test those on a stock LS3, in one of the tests I did, it only gained 10 horsepower. Does that mean that the heads are like ported LS3 heads don't make lots of power? No, they can. They can make a ton of power. It's just that you need a motor that can utilize that airflow. And until you put all the other stuff on it, like a camshaft, the head, it just can't utilize what the head has to offer. And that was the case of this airflow research head test too. But the combination of all of those things, you know, heads, cam, and intake, basically on this 6 liter with a flat top piston 6 liter, would have got similar results had we tested this like on the LQ9, which would have been a flat top 6 liter, or I think the L76 is also the truck version of this LS2. That you'd have seen similar gains. But heads, cam, and intake on that, you know, we picked up a lot of power. We picked up what's that, like 100 or a little bit more than 100 horsepower. That's kind of typical of these things. It works out really good. I like the LS2. The story that I'm going to do, or the video that I'm going to do, basically it's kind of the Forgotten Warrior, because it was a very limited run from, I think from 05 to 07 is when they ran this, when this LS2 was available. And it was only available in the VET and the GTO and the CTSV, and then, like I said, in that as that L76 version in the trucks. But a very short production run, and it's kind of overshadowed by the more powerful and bigger LS3, and then even kind of, I would argue, overshadowed by the long run of the LS1, which, you know, we had before the LS2 came up. So this is kind of cool stuff. I like these motors, and this was a crate motor that the guys provided me, and we did a ton of testing with. So thanks to the guys at GM Performance Parts and Gandra Chevrolet for all of that help. Well, we'll see what you guys got going on. Knowledge Lunchbox, what's going on? Jet. Neil's in the house from over. Are you in Wales or something, Neil? Is that where you're at? Eric, Bobby, what's going on? Trying to get distracted from rugby. Which rugby are you watching? Pickup tube ring gets pinched on what? What's the weight difference between an LS2 and an LQ4? 100 pounds is the block difference. What horsepower can you reliably get on an LS2? Well, this one was 560. Not an LS2 question, but an LS question. That's okay. I'm doing a 408 stroker, and I've read not to do a stroker because the block is so short and it pulls the piston too deep into the block. Is this true? A 408's not a problem. I don't go any more than a 4-inch stroke on these. Like, don't go to a 4100 or a 4125 stroke. A 4-inch stroke still works, and it doesn't pull the piston out too far. That's still a usable deal. Tristan, what's going on? Still poor power output per cubic inch per liter compared to a Honda. You guys have experimented with speed engineering headers and Y pipes. I have run speed engineering headers on stuff on the dyno, and they worked fine. I don't know about the Y pipes. I haven't run those on the vehicles. Richard, can you please do a video on cam comparison of changing the fire order to 5.7? We have changed firing orders from a Chevy firing order. We have done the 4.7 swap, but not the swap that you're showing there. And the cam swap itself didn't show any power change. The change comes from changing the cam specs, like the lift and duration, lobe separation angle, valve events, and that kind of thing. Changing just the firing order didn't change power. And we tested it on, I think that they tested it on a big block, and I think also on a small block for Westech, and Engine Masters did that stuff. Richard, do you have any experience with Summit Racing products as piston and rods? Yeah, their Summit Pro LS stuff is good. Did the NA build? I assume I don't have to get the best of the stuff, but some decent stuff should be fine for NA. Yeah, the Pro LS stuff is fine for boost and for, if you get forged pistons and rods, then the other things, the crankshaft and the stock block become the limiting factor. I love an LS2. It'd be awesome in my truck, but most likely LQ9 swap because it's cast iron. Yeah, you're in a truck. You're not really that concerned about weight because everything else that you have in the truck is going to be heavy. So the 100 pounds on the LS2 versus an LQ motor, not really that big a deal. Cadillac 500 airboat. There you go. Wales versus France in the rugby match. 43-0. I don't have a feel, having never watched rugby match. I don't know. I don't even know how much each score is worth. I don't understand what the scoring is. Is if each one of those is worth 43-0 would be a lot. I'm assuming it's more than that. Richard, what stall is best for a truck plus cam and a 6-liter? I think I would do a 2500 at least for a Truck Plus cam. Headers probably get 799 or 706 heads ported. I think I would run 799s that are ported on a 6-liter, and the fast intake is good. Getaway, what's going on? I just picked up a Lenati Black Magic Stage 2 for 181 shipped. MSRP was 440. Is Lenati going out of business? I don't know. I would be leery of something like that. Have you ever tested Rhodes lifters? I have not. And I don't remember even at West Tech, and obviously I've been going there for a long time, I don't remember being there when Jeff Smith or any one of those guys or Brule would have tested those even on flat tappet cams, like on small block Chevys. Excuse me. I don't remember seeing a test where it did what they say that they do. Is there any noticeable difference between Forge H and I-beam rods? You can have strength differences between those, but not as an absolute. You'd have to look at specifically at the two rods that you're talking about. And then also, how much do you need? I mean, we've done 1,500 horsepower with stock rods. So if you upgrade that and you double the strength of the rod, does it matter that you tripled the strength of the rod with something else because it's already more than you're ever going to hurt? Would you take milled 823 heads over 799s? I would put 823 heads over 799s anyway because they make more power. They definitely make more power than 799s. But if you mill them, then it will help with the loss and low speed power that you get between comparing those two stock heads. 5 points for a touchdown, 2 for conversions. Okay. See, I'm learning about rugby. I have a stock 6.2 of the Truck Norris cam going twin turbo, not looking for crazy power. Question is, what is a good size for the turbos? Just tell me how much power you want to make, David, and I can suggest turbos. Just finished mocking at my cylinder heads with an LSXR lower half. Also finished the bottle mounting, plumbing, and wiring for nitrous. Okay. Are you port matching the lower manifold or something on that? Has anyone ported an LSXR 102? I have tried testing those, and I haven't seen any power gain yet. I remember the one that Brian sent me was port matched to those TrickFlow 220 heads, but I haven't compared it against the stock one. So, David, you want 8 to 900, and you're looking for twins? Twins, I would pick 3076s for that power range. The BTR Red Hot cam is great. I'm putting one on my LS3 and a 2650. Yeah, that should be a good combination. I ordered a set of Rhodes Pro Street for a 383 for a gentleman. Didn't know if you've tested those. I haven't. I would like to. And I honestly, it's been so long since I've seen those and people talked about them. Occasionally people will bring them up in comments, but I haven't seen anything about those in a really long time. I didn't even know that they were still making them. Would I pick up power on my small block 350 by getting equal length short headers instead of a set that has 2 3-inch and 2 10-inch pipes? I don't see how you have a difference in 3-inch and 10-inch pipes on a small block. I don't see how headers could possibly be like that. How much power is an LS3 top end on an LS2 with the factory cam? Obviously less than it would be with an aftermarket cam, but I'm thinking 20. Can you explain boring and stroking a 5.3 aluminum block? What are size limits? Good sizes for NA. Would a 427 Forge build make 600 horsepower NA? You can go much bigger than that if you bore and stroke. If you sleeve a 5.3 like we did with the Dart and stuff, we did a 468. You can do bigger than 427s. You could make a 427 if that's what you want. I don't think I would go too much bigger than the 4185 bore that we did on that, just because you start reducing the amount of head gasket sealing area. I think that they said that sleeve would go to 4200, but we didn't go that far. So you could make it a little bit bigger. With those displacements, you could make a lot of power. We did the 468 made low 700s, I think, if I remember right. You're not going to do that with any of the stock heads. You would need a good ported head to support that power level. I ported the runner mouths, took off the ridges on the small radius that protrude into the plenum, and matched up the lower half of the intakes. Okay. Nitrous is great for beer chilling. Yep. So is an old CO2 fire extinguisher. Sounds like an old center dump shorty header. It's super shorties, middle two go directly into the collector. It's a clearance issue. Okay. No, I don't think equal length shorties will gain you much over unequal length shorties. They never have in any of the testing that I've done. Your only benefit on shorties would be if you made them all 10 inches. But if they were all less than 10 inches and then you had two there that were 10 inches, I think you're going to do better with the two that are 10 and the others being short. I was out in the mist rain we got, putting in new car seats for my twins. Not fun. They make the seats so Dad can't get his hands on the hooky hole. Yeah. Have you tested TPIS 90 millimeter LS6, LS2 intake? I didn't know that TPIS made LS intake manifolds. Yeah, Neil, CO2 is cheaper. That's a better way also to run those cooling rings and stuff that guys do on intercoolers, as long as you're not ingesting any of that into the motor. Obviously, that's not going to be good. Richard, did you see Cletus put a rusty junkyard 5.3 in the El Camino on the road? So they did a swap during sick week. That's pretty cool. With the above 468, what ported head would be best for that setup? I don't know about best. There's too many really, really good heads that you could put on there. If stuck with a factory stall, if aftermarket would go trick flow 225. On the 468, we used ported LS3 and ported LS7 style heads. And when it made 468, I think it had a masked LS7 head on it, and then a single plane style, the split CNC ported big mast 4500 intake manifold on it. Richard, I was looking at your garage sale items and noticed you have a small block Ford trick flow intake for sale. Is that a trick flow R? I'm trying to find out what it is. I don't know if the trick flow R lower is different than the track heat one. And I put a call into Brian at Summit to ask him, and he said that he didn't know either. I have the part numbers on it, but I was looking up today because Jimmy was asking me, and I tried to find the part number on it. The exhaust manifolds are flippable on the Northstar. Good. What size would fall between a 427 and 468? Go to Wallace Racing displacement calculator and put in any combination of bore and stroke that you want. You can go up to, I think we went to a 4,250 stroke. So you could go anywhere from 3622 to 40 to 4100 to 4125 to 4200 to 4250. And then also in bore sizes, you could go from 4-inch all the way out to, we went to 4185. So you could go to 4100, 4125, 4165, 4185, and put in all those combinations, and you could get any kind of displacement that you want. Brian Tooley, I tested one of his motors that made 700, and that was a 454. I've read about TPIS intakes a few times. Apparently, it's an LS2 90mm throttle body opening welded into the LS6 manifold. Also, I think they have ported and non-ported versions. So it's a bigger mouth LS6 manifold, because the LS6 manifold makes more power than an LS2 manifold does. But the LS6 manifold has the 78 or 80mm opening. The LS3 heads ported fit on a 5.3 aluminum block. No, they do not. They only fit on a 5.3 block after you have sleeved it. And you don't need an LS3 head or a ported LS3 head on a 5.3 anyways. It has no place there, because you won't ever utilize the airflow that an LS3 head has on a 5.3. Big mouth LS6 manifold. Okay. I don't think I would go for any of those ported ones like that. I would just get a fast. We know that the fast works. If you run 100 shot of nitrous on an LS, would you need a separate tune for it? So essentially have an NA tune and a nitrous tune. You don't need a nitrous tune. Well, I take that back. You do need a nitrous tune, because you need some way to take the timing out of it. That's all that you need, though. If you run a wet fogger setup where you add the fuel and the nitrous together, like in a single fogger, it takes care of the fueling needs. You don't have to put that into the tune, but you should be retarding the timing based on how much nitrous you're adding. And 100 shot is not hard to add. If you're already running good gas in it, like if you're taking it to the track and you put a mixture of 100, or you're running E85 or something like that, and you want to run 100 shot on it, we run 100 shot all the time without taking timing out of it, as long as the air fuel is safe. But if you're not running good gas in it, you're going to want to take timing out of it. I meant just the block. It would be bored and stroked and sleeved, so all three heads would work on that. On a 4185 bore, which is what we ran on our sleeved 5.7 block, same as an iron or an aluminum 5.3, because once you sleeve it, then you bore it to the size that you want. On a 4185 bore, you can put any LS head on there that you want, including what we ran was an LS7 head. So this is our you can see the different power curves here, and it's not going to run anything even though I clicked on play. But you can see where we started out stock. You can see where the airflow research heads are. You can see what the fast did, and then you can see the big jump up there when we put the camshaft in it. Show our little test motor, even though that lead photo is not an aluminum motor. It's a 6-liter, it's fine. We put 100 shot on a 1.4 Metro, basically doubled its power until it grenaded. Yeah, it gets hard to add that much nitrous to that little of an NA power output. And we don't try to double the power output on nitrous because that becomes difficult. It's not as hard on some of the Honda stuff that has an excess amount of head flow, I think. So we've run higher percentages, but I don't ever remember running like a 200 shot on a 200 horsepower Honda motor. What would be the max power you could make with an LS2 NA milled 821s ported fly cut pistons to make piston to valve clearance like a max effort factory part engine? I don't know. A ported set of 821 heads, you can get enough flow to support 700 or more horsepower. If you could do all of the other stuff, like have lots of compression and have lots of displacement, you're probably not going to get there with an LS2 though. You would need to have a stroked version of that. What size camshaft would you run a stroke 454 setup for street use, and what size stall forge internals? I don't know. Well, you should go take a look at the 454 video and look at Brian's deal that made 700. He ran that in a Corvette, but I don't know if he ran it with an automatic. But probably like a 3000 stall and that would work. Scott, you need someone to remind you to take the crank to Ohio? Crank it up, Buttercup. Yeah, dyno results. I love dyno results. It's my jams. It's my wife would say it's my love language. Dyno results. Do you have any videos showing how to optimize tune for engine on the dyno? I have videos showing what happens when you change the tune. So I run the engine like we do here, and we run it at 9 to 1, 10 to 1, 11 to 1, 12 to 1, 13 to 1 on an NA motor. And then also at, like, let's say 23 degrees and 25 degrees and 27 degrees and 29 degrees, which is where the thing wants to make peak power. And I show you how much power each one of those things is worth. I don't show you, if this is what you're asking, I don't show you what the stock tune is and then what an optimized tune is. I don't do that. The problem with that is the stock tune varies. It changes itself depending on operating conditions. And so you can't really get, I mean, we could make a run and then go, okay, this is what the timing curve was, and this is what the air fuel curve was. And then I could take that and make the engine do that on the engine dyno, but that's one run. And so it's better that I show you these other things and go, hey, if you missed timing by 5 degrees, here's how much power you wouldn't be making. If you miss the air fuel by 2 air fuel points, here's how much that's worth. Richard, what is better or easier to tune, an Edelbrock or Holly 600 vacuum secondary? I would say that would depend on how close it was when you put it on. A lot of times we have really good luck. The people that put carburetors on and have it be all wrong, we don't see that. We take a carburetor out of the box and we put it on the motor and it runs really good. And what we're tuning is really minor stuff. I've never taken a new carburetor out of the box and had it just like be atrocious and not be able to run. They're always close. Scott, you want to buy a 6-liter truck engine and doing a crank and piston? I got a Holly off, rebuilt. The Edelbrock is on a 289. The exception to what I was saying about the carburetors is if you go get a carburetor that's bad off of in a wrecking yard or off of another motor that has other problems, trying to solve that is a different issue than tuning. That's a whole different deal, because they may have all kinds of things. You may have plug passages in the main metering block in the idle circuit or transition circuit. They may have the pads on the cam for the acceleration pump may be worn on. You know, you can have all sorts of problems that are wrong with it. And then you have to go through those things one at a time. But that's not a universal thing. That's that carburetor specific thing that's problematic. And now we have to fix those problems. And those are things like when somebody says, oh, what is this? It makes a noise. I'm like, I'm not there. I don't know what it was doing when it was right. I don't know what it's doing now. I can't hear it. I'm not there. And that's the problem, is I'm not there. If I was there and we had the carburetor and I had it on a motor and I had it on the dyno, I could solve the problem. We could figure out what it is. But I can't do that over the phone, and I can't do that over comments usually. Might have spiders in it. Exactly. It could have all kinds of stuff. My ideal setup is a 4125 by 4125. Just you like the way that sounds. Scott, you need to de-stroke that, man. That's how you make all the power. 4125 bore is good, but it needs to be a 3-inch stroke so it'll rev and make the power. Because de-stroking. Yeah, no, not so much. A little bit less of that. A little bit less of making less power. I got that in a comment today about a 289 versus a 302. 289 will rev higher than a 302. Like, it's not going to rev with a stock head anyways. They're junk. Yeah, if you go big NA, just go big. Just that's better. A 408 is better than a 6-liter. It's better than a 6.2. And then a 415 is better than that. And then a 7-liter, a 427 is better than that. All of those are better. And the nice thing about that is even if it made the same power, like we tested a 383 that made 500 horsepower, and then we test a 5.3 that makes 500 horsepower. If you put them in a car, the 383 would be so much better. It'd be so much more fun to drive. I like the sound of a 454 in my Denali. Brian's 454 was stout because it made 600 and something foot-pounds of torque too. It was pretty impressive. Cathedral Port results. Strokers. 454. Okay, let's see how much torque it made. And it did it with a fast manifold, which is pretty impressive. Yeah, 703.7 and 630 foot-pounds of torque. So it was pretty stout. I put a new AVS2 on my car, and it was dead on, confirmed by my air fuel gauge. Yeah, we see that a lot. We can go grab carburetors from our carburetor cabinet at West-Tech and put them on. And whether I put a 650 on it or 750 or 850 or 950, we put it on there. It works. It's not that far off. 500 horsepower 4.8 versus a 500 horsepower 7-liter. Yeah. 500 horsepower 4.8 would be neat. I kind of want to do one of those. Yeah, Sean, a 340 works good. But a 318 doesn't rev better than a 340. Tomlinson, the bigger that you make the motor, the easier it is to reach 700 horsepower, and then the more torque and drivability you have. So if you look at the 495-inch motor that made 800, that's an even better way to go. Put a milder camshaft in that, and you're having fun. I feel like people who made power by de-stroking it just didn't have enough cylinder head to start with. Yeah, they never made more power. What they did was make a lot less torque, even if they made the same power. If you look at the 302, the DZ 302 and the 327, that's a perfect example. Very, very similar peak power numbers because it has, marginal cylinder heads on it. But same camshaft, same compression and stuff. The 327 just had way better average power. And the 350 even more so. I don't know what you mean by the 340 revs faster than a 318. I don't understand that. I don't know what people talk about with that. Is that like a free rev thing? I don't know how you rationalize that or how you compare that. Is it snappy? Snappy and zingy. I'm just trying to save up for my McLaren F1 twin turbo build. Camier. Yeah. Awesomer. Chock full of ability goodness. It's got all that. I'm going around the neighborhood. I need to do a GoFundMe page for my McLaren F1 build, right? Hey guys, trying to build a McLaren F1 and twin turbo it. So if you could help me out with my GoFundMe page, that'd be awesome. I don't want a lot. All I need is like 1,000 horsepower, let's say. Just twin turbos on the stock motor would be good. No, Scott, I want to keep the motor that's in it. I wouldn't LS swap it. I would just turbocharge the motor that's there. And I'd only run like, I think it's only going to need about 8 or 10 pounds. And I would run it on E85. And then it would be, that would be 1,000 horsepower and a lot more torque, obviously. Then it would be, because you don't want to the last thing you'd want to do is get beat in your McLaren. And also that car needs more, it needs more power. That GoFundMe might actually work. I don't know what's a McLaren F1 sell for now. It's got to be $1 million, right? Okay, McLaren F1 for sale. New and pre-owned McLarens for sale on DuPont Registry. No, those are 720s, McLaren GTs. We don't want those. McLaren F1 average price. Let's see. The average price of a McLaren F1 is $10 to $20 million. Oh my gosh. Yeah, it's more than I thought. I was not even close in my estimation. I think that that's probably out of reach. Will an LS7 intake fit an LY6? No, it won't. And it's not one that you'd want anyway, even if it would. That would be a terrible choice. And it won't fit anyways. The ports are completely different. I need a GoFundMe with the help for a 408 running in a factory 5 Cobra. Season versus new block. Is there any difference to be measured? In which block are you talking about? Eric, you just want a car you could drive? Would Summit internals be good for a 4-stroker? No, those would be fine. The stroker assembly is not a big deal. Let me dig around the couch for change. It's going to take a lot. Man, that's a lot of change. I think that's all the change that everybody has in their couch in the world. You can get me one cheap for 8 million Australian. What is the exchange rate? All right, folks, you heard Richard. Hit the like and subscribe button. We can get it up. Yeah, can you guys throw in some like super chats money for my McLaren? 20 million plus a new battery in California fuel prices. Why do I need a new battery? Do you have to notch the block on the 6-liter when you go to a 408 stroker? I honestly don't remember when we did those. I didn't think so, but I would check it. I always put them in and rotate them. That's really simple. You don't put rings or anything, and you just put it in and spin it around and make sure it all works. I do need an F1. I do need a McLaren. I need to tell Lisa. Lisa, I'm thinking that we should get a McLaren F1. It would inspire you to get your driver's license back, Eric? Is there a story there? Then my kids might think I'm cool too. Probably not. Teenage kids aren't like that. But I would be cool. $1 Australian dollar is 0.62 US dollars. Lisa would say, go ahead. I brought stuff home all the time to surprise her. I surprised her with the 355 and then with a boat that just came home and said, hey, look, you guys need to go outside. And with the Nova. The Nova was the least expensive of all of those. But because that was basically just a trade. But yeah, a McLaren would be big. You got an L76 truck intake and the advantage of putting a 92 millimeter round throttle body on that. I don't know if I'm familiar with an L76. Is that like an LY6? I put manual throttle bodies on there just to put manual throttle bodies on there. But doesn't that have a 90 millimeter opening already? I don't know what you're talking about, Sean. I don't understand why there wouldn't be a battery in a McLaren F1. What type of springs are needed above 8,000 RPM? That's not really a spring issue as much as it is a combination of lobe design and stability versus spring frequency. Oh, the L76 is the 6-liter truck version of the LS2. Then that's just going to be a Trailblazer SS intake manifold, right? That's going to be a 90 millimeter opening. So you just put a 92 millimeter throttle body on it. It's not going to be any different than a 90 millimeter throttle body, but an L76 can't be like an LS2 if it has rec port heads on it. Then it must just be like an LY6. It's nice my wife doesn't care as long as the bills are paid. Yeah, Tomlinson, the forged internals that you're putting in are all easily able to withstand 700 horsepower because we know the stock stuff will withstand 1,500 horsepower. So you don't have to worry. You don't have anything to worry about with any of the forged internals that you would put in there at that power level. As rec port heads. Yeah, rec port heads would need a rec port intake manifold. Which that truck version of the rec port intake manifold works really good. It works as good as the LS3 intake manifold does. Austin, it's definitely going to be a dual spring for 8,000. When we did the 8,000 RPM deal on the, what did we do that on? We did it on a D-stroked, because that's the coolest thing. We did it on a D-stroked LS3. So it was a 4.8 stroke crank. It was a 4.8 crank and then a custom rod length and piston. And we put it in an LS3 block just because I had one. And we ran that to 8,000. And it took I got cams both from Billy at Comp and from Brian at BTR. And then we put short travel lifters on it. They were still hydraulic roller because that's what we wanted to do, is make it a hydraulic roller deal that would go to 8,000. And lots of guys are doing that. And so it's a function of putting enough, not just enough spring rate, but it's not, you're not going to be able to do it with a beehive spring or a conical spring. It's definitely going to be a dual spring. If you could only buy one forged rods or forged pistons, I think I pick forged pistons. But definitely want LS3 or LS7 heads for a stroker build. You can make 700 with ported cathedral ports also, but for that displacement and that power output, I would pick an LS3 or an LS7 head. There are lots of good versions of those cylinder heads. The LS3 AFR heads will easily do that. I think that those things flow like, I want to say at least 360, but I'm thinking more like 380 or something. Let's see. AFR mongoose heads. Mongoose. How, when you select AFR LS3 heads, does AFR not come up? They need to work on their search engine. LS3 mongoose heads. $380 CFM at 700. Yeah, that's enough to support that power level. Will -330 pistons work with that rec port heads and big 100 valves? The 30 over, are you asking about will it work with LS7 heads? What was the capacity of the test engine being shown? The test engine, the dyno results are of an LS2 that we did. It was an LS2 stock, and then we added Airflow Research 205 heads, and then a fast intake manifold, and then a BTR red hot camshaft. And it went from like 460 to 565 with all of those things. Have you ever heard of an engine not fully dropping to idle with the clutch pushed in or in neutral until the car physically comes to a complete stop? The engine and its idle, especially if it's not in gear, should not recognize vehicle speed at all. I mean, the engine shouldn't care. I don't know why the tune would vary it based on wheel speed. I don't know how that would come into play. Do you have an old W head sitting around? What's an old W head? By the way, in your stroked, destroked LS3 versus stroked 347. Did I do a video of that? Our goal on either one of those was not to make peak power at 8,000. It was just to rev the motor to 8,000. A rec port LY6. Yeah, Brandy, an LY6 has rec ports from the factory, so rec port heads will fit on those. It likes to hang at 2,000. Is that a tune problem then? That it could be a physical problem too, like the throttle body hanging. Will your fuel injector kit work with that build? I know the power rating is fine. Are the fuel rails the same? No, an LS, it's not going to be the same. I don't think that the length of the injector is the same on the LS3 as it is on the truck. A W Chevy or Mopar? Yeah, I don't have any 348s or 409 Chevys, if that was the question. I don't have any Mopars either. Richard, next time you dyno a 550 horse NA motor, please stick a stock 98 MAF in line and do a pull. I'm wondering how much I'm losing using it. Oh, so you want to see how restrictive it is? I would imagine a stock mass air meter would be restrictive at that power level. My old Dodge Daytona would idle itself up anytime the VSS sensed a signal. Why would the idle change based on vehicle speed? Is it because it doesn't need to idle down until the thing stops so that it doesn't stall? Maybe that's something, right? Are you doing another live feed tonight? I don't think so. Your goal was to see if the engine was capable. We only wanted to show that you could run 8,000 RPM with hydraulic roller cams. But the D-stroke one was still making power at 8,000 before you let off the throttle. We didn't stop any of those runs before the power peak. Yeah, GM. Somebody was asking about it. I don't know what their W question was. What I'm trying to figure out is how much of a piston I can put in an LY6 head 823 will -3 pistons clear. You don't care about that. What you care about are the valve reliefs. Your piston, whether it's a dish or a flat top or a dome from the aftermarket, you should have valve reliefs in it. If you have valve reliefs in it, then it will clear any kind of camshaft that you're likely to put in there. Would a stock MAF work on a stroker build? No, I wouldn't ever run a stock mass air meter on a 700 horsepower motor. That's definitely going to be restrictive. You should use a standalone ECU or speed density factory setup. Yeah, Brandy, just get valve reliefs and then you don't have to worry about it. You can run even bigger camshafts than we normally run on stock piston to valve stuff. That helps a lot. Whenever we go to an aftermarket piston, it just cures all of those problems. And it really doesn't matter what we choose. We normally choose the dish and stuff, not because the dish doesn't help piston to valve clearance. At least on an LS, it doesn't. The valve relief does that. But we just pick whether we want a dish or a flat top based on the compression in combination with the chamber size that we're using. Big crazy power, big crazy LS2 power. That's a good combination. That would be a good motor for the Fox Mustang. And that's out there at like 64, 6,500 too. And 500 foot-pounds, that would be nice. They have a huge chamber. I'm trying to get the compression to 11-to-1 on an NA deal. That would be good. Yeah, standalone's going to eliminate. The OBD2 won't be part of the equation anymore. I don't like standalones on street cars. As long as you can get rid of the mass air meter or go to a much bigger mass air meter if that's available. Like we did with the Mustangs, we would put the Pro M77s or then later on the 80 millimeter Lightning ones, I think. And then you would want to go even bigger if people were making serious power from them. Or like on a boosted application, you would blow through the meter. You know, one thing I never did, now that I think about that, is that I never, and I'm wondering now, having tested a lot of these, like Vortex supercharged 5 liters and 347s and Stroker 351 versions and stuff. Having run a bunch of those on the dyno and not using the stock ECU with those, but we made a lot of power with those. But in the car, I always, at least in my Mustang, we always ran it through a Pro M77 meter. But trying to make supercharged power through a 77 millimeter opening, drawing through that, I never measured the vacuum between the mass air meter and the blower on these things. And I'll bet it was there. I bet there was some. Because you would never run a 77 millimeter throttle body on a 500 or 600 horsepower, like even a naturally aspirated LS, but like on a supercharged one, you would never do that. That would definitely be restrictive. We know that from the M90 testing. When I disconnected the vehicle speed sensor, it wouldn't idle up and it seemed to drive a little nicer. The Corvette speed density. One more question on a Terminator X system. Do you use the mass flow sensor? We don't on anything. We are not on anything that we run on the engine dyno. Valves clearance themselves. For a turbo L29, 800 to 1,000 horsepower, heavy lifted street truck, keep stock heads, or AFR 265 is worth it for flow. Okay, a couple things, Cajun, on your deal. Airflow 265s would be way better than the factory 454 heads that you had on there. They're also aluminum. And even if you lost compression, if this is going to be a turbo deal, which I think it is, yeah, it says turbo L29, you won't have any problem making that power output. And because the motor is a 496, like a near 500-inch motor, and you're only wanting 1,000 horsepower, it's going to be a very, very responsive with a single 1,000 horsepower turbo on it. And those are some of my favorite cylinder heads. Those Airflow 265s, because I think that they just get a raw deal because everybody thinks that they're too small. But like for a 600 horsepower deal, a 600 horsepower big block, those are really good. And we made more than that. I got $5,000 burning a hole in my pocket and can't do anything with it because of emissions. We got 1 more minute. If it ends up being an issue with my throttle body, that's just more justification to replace my fast 102 with an MSD Atomic and put a 103 Nick Williams on it. Is the Nick Williams a drive-by-wire throttle body, Sean? Drive-by-wire, yo. Whoa. Yeah, look at that aluminum goodness. That was a good looking. Let's go back to that one. It's a good looking stock motor. It was all clean. When the crate motors are just come out of the crate, they were really nice. How fancy that is. It's a good little motor. Although I do have to say, that one they supplied, and they also supplied later on an LS2, and I ran a lot of tests on both of those. So this was look, it's not all from the wrecking yard. I should have taken lots more pictures of this and sent them to the guys from West Tech every time they gave me a hard time about, really, you're going to put that on the dyno? I need a tetanus shot just standing next to it. And on that note, it is time to go. Thank you guys all for showing up. I don't know if I'll be on later. If I am, it'll be a big surprise for you guys. If not, I will see you guys all tomorrow.